Still.
Yeah.
We're in chapter 22, and specifically last week, Brother Hank covered the Last Supper in that. So this week we're covering verses 41 through 53, and this is the story of Jesus' arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. I always get that wrong. Kind of the premise behind this is when the books, their subject, the way they highlight this is willing. And we knew that Christ was willing to do what he did at the cross, and so that's where it kind of goes into this. And the message here, I guess, is that life is hard. We have there's all sorts of pressures. We have job pressures. We have pressures from our health. We have family relationship issues. Sometimes just being a Christian alone is can be hard. And sometimes life's problems makes it difficult and hard to trust God in those situations when things are going off the rails. When you get that phone call in the middle of the night, that's not the phone call you want. When that phone rings in the middle of the night, that's never a good thing. Never a good thing. That it makes your heart just race when that happens. Because we being humans, we have some of that nature within us is we want to be in control, and we're not. And we have to come to that resolution that we're not in control. We have to remind ourselves, however, that God is on His throne and we have to look back at our historical walk with Christ and realize that even though we've gone through all these trials and tribulations in our life, that He has carried us regardless of the outcome. Now, we may not have always enjoyed the outcome, but He carried us through that outcome. And He still carries us, or maybe carrying us through a situation. The first set of verses that we're going to go through is verses. The whole section is verses 41 through 46. We're going to start out in verses 41 through 42. But first, we have to remember this is where that Jesus had led them away from the upper room where they had the Last Supper and all that, and led them to the Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane. That was kind of been his habit, of doing that, going to there, late and praying, and that was his kind of getaway and all that. He went there often to pray. It was part of his regular routine that he had come up with. And of course, Judas, being one of the 12, knew this. Knew this was part of his routine. But even though that it was, and Jesus, of course, knew what his fate was going to be. He knew what was going to transpire. He was, being, who he is. He knew that fate, but he didn't hide his behavior. He didn't change his behavior to escape or to avoid Judas. Instead, he continued on to his, routine, knowing that, what was going to transpire. But he, being that who he was, he's also warning Jesus. Jesus also had been talking to the disciples and kind of giving them a heads up to what's going to be coming down and all that. So he had warned his disciples, that they would be tempted and to be alert and all that. So he, with that, he also, with his disciples, he also brought his closest disciples, his three that you hear a lot, between Peter, James, and John. He brought them even closer to him, to where he was in the garden. And these are guys that did not, they had their own, they went through their own trials and tribulations, their own issues. We know that, of course, Peter, he was also crucified. In his case, he was asked to be crucified upside down, so he wouldn't be crucified the same way that Christ is, so it wouldn't come off as him being like Christ. What a statement. James, ends up dying by the sword by Herod, beheading him, probably. John, of course, died of natural causes, but he's the one that, of course, Jesus always said he's the one that Jesus loved, and he's the one that But he brought him closer. He brought that inner circle closer to him at that point in time that he knew he was going to go up against something that in his human life here, that his human existence was the toughest thing he would have gone up against. So we'll start off in verses 41 through 42, and I'll read there. It says, "Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, began to pray. 'Father, if you are willing, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.'" A stone's throw. He kept them a stone's throw away. And you've heard, if you're debating, I don't know about younger people and stuff like that, but that's a common term you hear. You've heard in the past. It's just stone's throw away. I mean, what does that mean?
A short distance.
A short distance, right? He kept them near him. And what's significant about that is that when you're going through tough times, and when you're going through facing things, you want the people that are closest to you near you, don't you? But you want to draw them in because they're going to give you comfort. They're going to be there with you. They're going to go through those storms with you. You want them near you. And Jesus was not like that. Remember, he's got this human nature to him. He wanted those people close to him, and that was his inner circle. That was the ones he confided in. That's where he poured his life into these guys. And he wanted them near him. He wanted them being near him.
Well, he wanted them near him, but at the same time, like a lot of times when you're sick or something, where you want someone close enough that you can call them, but you want them just far enough away that you can have your own feelings right there, and that's what he did. He separated, but had them close. He
had them close. You're right. But he also, like you said, he went away and then he knelt down to pray. And that doesn't seem to us from a praying stance, that the typical praying stance in Jewish culture, and still is in the Eastern Orthodox type churches, is that you pray standing. It's a standing prayer, and there's various forms where you stand and where your head's lower, whether your head's high. And we do that. I mean, when we worship in church in the morning, we go to our worship. We'll raise hands or that. That's a way of worshiping. For some of us, we're standing there, we're praying during that period of time, and that's a form of prayer. But this is a different type of prayer. This is a kneeling prayer. This is where he's kneeling, and it's more of a prayer of repentance and humility. And he's at that point that he's coming to the Father not with that type of attitude with that. It's with with that sort of attitude. And he says first Father. He says, Father, if you're willing. That's not a more typical way of referring to God. He's using the Greek word that's behind this is a basis for the word paternal. It's that relationship. And Mark uses in his as the Aramaic Abba, Father. It's a more intimate form than just saying praying to God. It's an intimate. It shows that intimacy he has in that relationship with the Father. And he says, if you're willing, take this cup from me. Notice that he doesn't do it. He doesn't go off and say, ask for the request and then reverse it and says, but if it's okay. He first goes off right off the bat. He says, if you're willing. He does it in a way that's right off. It's a submission. It's not a request. It's a submission. If you're willing, he's already submitting. He's already submitting ahead of time before he makes the request. If you're willing, take this cup from me. Nevertheless, my will, but yours will be done. So the cup, that's used a lot in the Old Testament. It's used a lot. Is to not necessarily, in this case, not necessarily, it doesn't represent necessarily death, but it represents the judgment of God. The judgment of God. So he knew that he's going to take on the full wrath of God. This is the cup he's going to have is the wrath of God. He's taking that on, and we see that human side of knowing that pain and anguish he's going to face. He knows what's going to happen. He knows that anguish. He's going to face during this, and he faces it, willingly, knowing that he's innocent. Knowing he's innocent, he's facing that pain, knowing he's innocent. We face those pains and all that, but it's thrust up on us. We don't usually willingly go into pain, it's thrust up on us and we accept it and we move on with it, but we don't willingly go for stand in front of an innocent be an innocent person and go in and accept the pain and the agony of someone's, consequences. We'll go with them into it, but we're kind of more thrust into it or made into it. So, it shows that at that point in time, he's truly expressing love. He's expressing the love, he's expressing the love, you can tell in his words, he's expressing the love for the Father, the respect and the love for the Father. He's also expressing the love for us to do that, to willingly do that.
In the study of the Gospels, this passage in the various Gospels, we talk about the idea of nevertheless theology.
Mm-hmm.
That as you go to God, God expects us to say to Him, God, here's what I'd really like to have.
Right.
Here's what I want. Nevertheless, whatever it is that you intend, that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
And this is what Jesus did in the garden. That word, you're talking about the word Father. The best translation of that idea from the Greek Abba is Daddy.
Mm-hmm.
It's a term of endearment. And so it's intimate and personal rather than just,
Almighty God.
yeah. And so, when Jesus went into the garden, he falls to his knees and he says, Daddy, I don't want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be a better way of doing things than this. Nevertheless, whatever you have in store for me, I'm willing to accept. And that's, to me, this is one of the key passages in the whole New Testament, because it tells us what we should look like when we go to God with problems, with things that are not going to turn out well, with things that are not going to be pretty.
Yeah, I had the same, and if you've been in my country, you've heard this story a million times, so I hate to repeat it again, but I will.
Yeah.
Is that when my mom had her stroke and all that, I prayed, and every time I prayed, she'd get a little bit better. This happened going on for a year. I mean, she was on her deathbed and stuff, and this continued on, and I finally, had to get to the point that, and God was working on it. He was working on my faith during this time, and so with that, I came to this realization that God was faithful. Every time I went to my knees in prayer, she would come out and get a little bit. And it continued on over and over and over again for almost a year. And I finally got to the point, Lord, what am I doing? I am not trusting you. This is what I desire, but it's not about my will, lest your will be done. And he took her within a week. And that's okay. I have peace with that because I know that was his will, because of the way he approached. He conditioned me. That was one of the building points of my faith, was going through that hardship and seeing God faithful, but then finally releasing that to him. Even though the outcome wasn't my outcome, I knew God was in control of that outcome, and I was okay with that.
And I think it's good that you notice that. One of our biggest faults is he does that, but we never look back and say, oh, wait a minute. Here I was asking him. It wasn't until I said this. He does that all the time with us. He answers our prayers, but sometimes we don't.
But I think he prepares you.
Yeah,
also.
that's right. But it's looking back and knowing, oh, wait a minute. Now I see where he was preparing me. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then sometimes you're really out of your comfort zone when you're with someone that's in a situation like that. Where someone has someone dying in the family or something, and you have to be there with them. You're out of your comfort zone, but you know that God has prepared you to be with them, to support them, and that's even harder because you can't control the situation. He has to control it.
And the same thing happened with Sue. I heard her pray this prayer. Lord, y'all know the stuff she went through all the time. And when she prayed this prayer, there was like an immediate change of her accepting what was already happening to her. And her attitude changed about from being sick to accepting it and knowing that, Lord, you're not going to heal me. You're going to use me through this.
Mhm.
And so many people was touched by her willingness to accept what was going on. And how can you go through this and God's in control, he's handling it. So she put her faith in him. And I can tell you, when she prayed that prayer, it was like, it was almost a change, you know, of acceptance of what was gonna happen, you know. And like I said, that was probably about 15 years before she passed. But for 15 years, she knew that, Lord, if you take me today, fantastic. If you don't, what do you have ready for me?
Mhm.
And that was the attitude change of what she had. And like I said, a lot of people, how can you come to church, you know, and, well, I'm doing his will. And there's a big difference in that one. I wish I could pray that prayer and say, Lord, your will be done in my life sometimes, because I fail to do the accept at the same time. You know, and we all have to look at that.
Yeah, and she, I mean, you know, she impacted a lot of people. I'll tell you personally, she impacted me.
Yeah.
So, through that, so, absolutely. Verses 43 through 46, I'm trying to find this one. Then an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. Being in anguish, he prayed more fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling to the ground. When he got up from prayer and came to the disciples, he found them sleeping, exhausted from their grief. Why are you sleeping? He asked. He asked them, get up and pray so that you won't fall into temptation. You know, right off, the angels appeared to him. We know that the angel appeared to him before, after the 40 days of fasting, when he was tempted by Satan. That he was strengthened by the angels. And this is another example of the angels coming and appearing to him and strengthening him and helping him through it. You know, we also have, you know, that they may not materialize themselves in front of us. We also have the ability to call upon God, and God will send his angels to hold us up in situations and strengthen us through the Holy Spirit. And so we have that as well, and he used that to help him go through this. He knew what he was coming. You know, he was in anguish. You know, he's praying a fervent prayer. It's intense. The blood, sweat like blood. I mean, drops so thick that, you know, you ever going through a big heavy storm where the droplets are so big it feels like they're banging your car almost like it's hail, but it's not. It's just rain. It's really, I mean, this is the way it's intense. He's sweating intensely. He's having that. Some even say, I mean, there's different commentaries that says that maybe it was blood vessels may have been even bursting, and it may have been literally, you know, tinted blood drops that were coming out of his head.
It's called hematodrosis.
Huh?
It's called hematodrosis.
Yeah.
Caused by extreme physical or emotional stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he was stressed. He was like, just like us humans, you know. He was in a human form. He was stressed about what was about. He's about to take on, he knew he was about to take on the sin of the world. He's about to take on, he knew God. Remember, he was Abba. He knew God. He knew God's wrath. He knew what God could do. You know, he knew what the Father was capable of, and he was about to take that wrath on. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine? I mean, we sort of see what God can do, but we don't know God like Christ. You know, Christ. This is God, and this is God on earth. This is Him on earth. He knew what was capable of Him, and He was about to take this on, this full wrath, and that's intense. And but the disciples who he like I said, he'd given them some heads up on what's going on, and they were stressed. They were stressed to the point that they fell asleep. Stress, you know, mental stress is very debilitating. I mean, it's, you know, even more so than physical. So I've done both types of jobs in my life. I've when I was in college and all that, and stuff like that, I worked in a plant, and I came home exhausted every day, and all that from physical, you know, working 12-hour day shifts and stuff, and I have that. But you know what? As hard as that was, and just physically, coming home after a hard day at work where I do just mental stuff, and it's just the stress of dealing with people and processes and things, and nothing seems to go right. God doesn't stop when you get home. At least the physical stuff, if you lay down, the physical stuff stops. The mental just continues on. You cannot shake it until you go to sleep. And that's what they're doing. They're escaping it. They're going to sleep to escape the stress that they're under. You're just tired and just worn out. And that's where they're on. Their mind, is running with this, and they're tired, but he says, this is not the time, guys. This is not the time.
Back in the late 60s and early 70s, when the idea of crisis counseling was just beginning to be a thing, there was a set of research done, and they put thermographs, which are basically cameras that measure heat sensitivity, on people in counseling situations. And what they discovered was that the person dealing with a personal crisis, sitting in the chair, interacting with a counselor, actually burns more energy than a person climbing stairs.
I can believe it.
So,
I can believe it.
Well, physical stress, you can work and I'm tired. I'm gonna take a break. Mental stress, you don't get a break. It's just there, and it wears you, and
Mental stress can also make you physically sick and you're not even aware that that's what's causing it.
True.
I went through a situation where my whole body, I was mentally stressed and I had a cough that I could not get rid of. I would drink NyQuil every night to try to keep it from just constantly coughing and coughing and coughing, and it was stress that was doing it. I was so physically or mentally stressed beyond even realizing that that's what was causing it. Because there was no illness, per se, that there was no cold or anything that would have caused me to have that. It was just a stress cough that made me physically sick.
Yeah, like I said, having, all of us having children, children will bring a tremendous amount of stress in your life, and you can kind of experience that. And it's you worry about them and all that, and you go through that stress with them, and you take that on. And it's tough. I mean, when going to having children is what drew me to God, because I realized that I can't do this apart from Him. This is not happening. So when Kelsey was born is when I really started drawing closer back to God. So I got back involved in church and all that. And because of that, I just knew that it wasn't possible without Him. Do you ever struggle sometimes with God's will? And what do you think He's putting in your life and with His will that you're doing? Do you struggle with that?
are you doing daily or hourly?
Exactly. It's a struggle. It's a struggle. It can cause stress. You go on, God, is this your will? Especially when God lays it all out and it's perfectly clear what His will is. It's like, you sure that I'm tuning in the right channel? Maybe that's Scott's channel that I'm tuning into, not mine. So it's difficult. It's a struggle sometimes. But you have to remember God's character and who He is and how faithful He is, and lock into that and realize, you know what, that's your will, Lord. There's a reason, and I have to be obedient.
Amen.
So to that. Yeah. The next section is in betrayal. So we start off with that's what the heading is here. Verses 47 and 48. While he still was speaking, while he's still speaking, suddenly a mob came, and one of the 12 named Judas was leading them. He came near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? So you notice right off the bat, while he was still speaking, he was still talking to the guys about why are you, why are y'all sleeping? Why, he didn't. I'm sure he didn't say y'all, but that's what I said. Why are y'all sleeping? If he was Southern, he would say y'all. Why are y'all sleeping? But anyway,
You didn't say you guys?
he didn't say you guys, no. But it was no transition. He's right there. He's right there. And then notice that Judas is not just a part of the crowd. Judas is leading them. He was leading them. And of course, this is a fulfillment of prophecy. This is in Zechariah, that in chapter 13, verses 6 through 8. He's going to be betrayed by a friend. He's He's going to be betrayed by a friend, and Judas is a friend. Judas is one of the 12. You know, he's going to be betrayed by him. You know, so you know, it was he kissed him. Now that's being, you know, to us, you know, that's a not very common thing. You go into areas that are more, there's a lot of Italian ancestry and all that. We have friends that are out of state, and they, when they see us, you know, when the lady, she kisses us on each cheek, drives us, you know, it's different. It's just different. We have to get used, but we love them, and it's normal. It's normal. Yeah, it's normal, and we're okay with that. You know, but for us, you know, how we are, it's just not normal for us down here. But they're great people, and that's their way of saying, you know, I'm here to see you. I love you. You know, you're friends. And that's how he approached him. He approached him, hey friend, rabbi. He even says rabbi, you know, teacher. You know, I'm about to betray you. You know, that's what he ends up doing. You know, so you know he did this. He was saying that, you know, he says, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Not just saying, Judas, are you betraying your friend? He's saying the Son of Man. Are you betraying the Messiah? He's saying it. You're not just betraying just anybody. You're betraying the Messiah. You know, with a kiss. You know, with a friendly gesture of saying that you're, you know, my friend. You're betraying.
Stab him in the back.
And so, yeah, he's stabbing him in the back. And of course, you know, we know that Judas wrestles with his decisions later on, and when he realizes the crucifixion and all that, he was trying to return the blood money, and they refused, and it ends up being they end up using it to call it a field of blood money or something like that. Anyway, there's a place they used to bury people and stuff like that. That's what they used the money for, to buy land for that. He ended up committing suicide later on, hung himself when he realized what he had done. You know, he wrestled with that decision later on. But at the time, it was, you know, he was given enough money, you know, that he thought it was a good deal for him, you know, and such. So it's really coming down out there.
Yeah, if you've ever had a friend that you thought was your friend, and then later on they betray you, it's really hard to turn around and forgive them and take them back as a friend. But I have done that, and it became stronger in the long run because they realized I was their friend. Good times bad. You know?
So in verses 49 through 50, he says, when those around him saw what was going to happen, they asked, Lord, should we strike with the sword? Then one of them struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. Luke is very specific. Remember, Luke is a physician. He's very specific of the right ear. The other Gospels don't go into that great detail there. John in his Gospel reveals that, of course, Peter's the one that does this. And Malchus was the victim that took the ear being off. But notice that, you know, they asked, you know, but Peter's grand style of Peter, who he is, Peter's the one that rushes to things, and Peter doesn't wait for Jesus' answer. He just goes off and does it. You know, he responds with that emotion that we're all, you know, when something happens, we just want to react. We don't think about the consequences, we just react, and that's where Peter is. Peter's your typical human that has a loved one that's being attacked. He's going to react, and that's how we are. And sometimes we have to hold back and say, you know, wait for Jesus' answer, wait for Christ to tell us, you know, where are we to move next, not necessarily react so suddenly. And so he does that. And, you know, how we respond is very similar. Sometimes like I said, we just react. You know, that Peter does this, you know, this reaction is typical of us. You know. But Jesus, in verse 51, but Jesus responded, no more of this, and touching his ear, he healed him. So he touched Malchus's ear and healed it. And that's a show. That's showing Jesus Christ again. He's showing that compassion and acceptance of what his fate's going to be. And he embodies his own teachings, right? I mean, he's teaching what he's talking about what he taught at the Sermon on the Mount. You know, this love regarding your enemies. Love thy enemies. He's not gonna react in that way. He's gonna react in the way that, you know, God would want him to react. He's gonna act in love, and he's gonna, you know, he's not gonna take any ill against Malchus. He's gonna heal him. And I don't know if the ear completely fell off, he had to pick it up or not, but, you know, I'm not sure.
I mean, I feel like he was going for the head.
Yeah, he was, and he was
And
Peter was just a bad.
And the guy goes to duck the sword.
Yeah, and slices his
Gets
ear
the
off,
ear.
right,
That's-
so he was a.
I feel like he was. I feel like he
Oh,
was.
he
going
wanted to
for
take
the
him
head.
off, yeah, he was definitely,
Why
he
did he do it
was,
again then?
yeah,
Why did they
and,
do it? Slap him
and-
again?
Jesus
and remember,
said,
we know Peter reacts emotionally again when he's confronted later on, when Jesus tells him, you know, you're gonna deny me 3 times. And Peter again acts emotionally and then realizes later, oh, you know, Peter's that one, that's that us that, you know, we just wanna react, and then we think about, oh, well, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I shouldn't have, you know, said that to that person, or I shouldn't have had that action. You know, Peter's that one that regrets it later on after he, you know, he's already done it. You know, he just reacts really quickly. So, but anyway, let's see. We've got 10 more minutes here before we.
Well, it's worth remembering, I mean, if you read the verse where Jesus responds to the high priest, when Peter pulls his sword and attacks, he doesn't attack Judas. He
Yeah.
attacks a slave.
Yeah.
Why?
You wanna attack?
Well, Jesus responds to him and says, you come for me bearing swords and clubs.
Mhm.
They were armed. They were coming to physically take Jesus, and Peter was responding to protect him.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this wasn't just a violent outburst. He was actually defending,
Mm-hmm.
you know, against an armed attack.
Strike first or be struck.
That's
Yeah.
right. And
And we'll cover that in the next 2 verses.
Well, yeah.
okay.
And then most of us are gonna stand back and go, hey, your ear's laying on the ground, good. Wait, Jesus says, I know you're fixing to punish me. You're gonna be one of them that's gonna say, crucify me, but I'm gonna still heal you and show you my compassion, my love that I have for all mankind, no matter what. I don't care how much you wrong someone, Jesus still loves you. And that's the point of the message he's getting across. I'm still gonna take care of you, even though you're trying to harm me.
And it's crazy to think that they didn't stop for a second and say, wait a minute. You know, here we are coming at him and he is showing compassion to us. What are we doing?
He still came for them. He didn't just come for Peter and them.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he came for all of us.
But they didn't second guess that. Ooh, maybe we should rethink this decision.
This guy doesn't, he's healing people still, and you know, wait a minute, no.
This is why we're coming after you, because you're healing people.
That's right, and that's exactly the attitude that Jesus takes in the next couple of verses. Verses 52 to 53 says, then Jesus said to the chief priests, temple police, and elders who had come for him, have you come out with swords and clubs as if I were a criminal? Every day while I was with you in the temple, you never laid a hand on me. But this is your hour and the dominion of darkness. You know, he's mocking them. I mean, he's saying that, you know, you had all these opportunities. This is the chief priests. These are this is the elders. That's Sanhedrin. You know, some of these may have been hired Roman guards to come with them. But this wasn't the government coming. This was the religious folks. These are the church folk. This is the church folk coming, you know, after them. And they don't do it in a way that's publicly can be seen as church people like to do. They like to do it in the quiet.
Oh,
Where no one can see.
the cover of darkness.
Cover of darkness. Yeah, we don't want to do it where there's a scene. We don't want the news crew to be on the scene when it happens. We're going to take care of our business quietly.
Put all your cell phones up, we're doing this video.
Exactly. It's going to be at night. It's going to be quiet. It's going to be dark, and we're going to come and take care of business. And that's what they do. And so, you know, it was dark now in the garden. You know, so I mean, that may have helped that Peter didn't, you know, missed him and all that. It was dark. You know, why wouldn't they touch him in the temple? He was popular right now. He was popular.
Because they're jealous.
Yeah, he was popular. They weren't going to touch him in the temple. People would you know, at that point in time, you know, he was popular there. They were afraid of the people.
The week
Well, there's
before, they
also
were,
the fact that under Jewish law, if you commit an act of violence in the temple, you're expelled for life.
and the
So
week,
there's that.
the week before, they were laying out the palms for him in their coats and stuff, and the King of Kings, you know, he, like you said, he was the man.
Yeah, and so, I mean, we know that, you know, that, you know, Jesus had God, of course, you know, God is on his side. He's already been strengthened by an angel. And we know that, you know, Matthew tells us that, you know, I could have 12 legions of angels here, like that. You know, 60,000 angels. I mean, one angel would have been enough, but he could have had 60,000 angels at his beck and call if he wanted to, at his disposal. So Jesus was, you know, you don't have to do this. You're going to do this, but this, you know, I'm willingly going to go. You know, this isn't, you know, this is my fate. This is what I'm going to. I'm doing this. You know, I'm dying for you. You know, I'm dying for the opportunity for you to know who I am.
Yeah.
And I mean, we of course don't know what happened to all those guys, but at that point in time, he's dying for maybe even some of the ones that are standing with him. You know, he's dying for that opportunity it is for them to come to know who he is. And so sometimes, you know, we go through life. Sometimes it seems as if Satan may be winning the situation, and it looks grim here, doesn't it? But if we yield our emotional side, we yield, to our emotions, we can become discouraged, feel defeated, and feel like he's won. And that's not the case, you know, because God is in control, and we want to be on the side of God's side in the situation, not on man's side or Satan's side. We want to be on that side of history. We don't want to be on the side of history of Judas, you know, where Judas thought he was doing right. He was pleasing the priests and the chief priests and all those guys. He was making them happy. He thought he was doing right. He was going to make some money off of it in the process.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't realize who Christ really was at that point. He didn't realize that he was, you know, but Jesus reveals it to him. You know, this is the Son of Man you're betraying. You just betrayed the Son of Man, and he comes to that realization later on. Wow, what did I do? You know, but he was a part of, you know, God's plan. You know, he was a part of the plan.
How many times are we like Peter? In fact, they asked the question, Lord, should we strike? So when we have troubles coming against us, and we ask the Lord, what do we do? But then we go out and react before we wait for God's answer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how often do we do that in our own lives?
Yeah.
They took the time to ask, but they didn't take the time to wait for the answer. They just jumped out.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's to see that, going to Christ, you went through that in a willingly way, and we go through, kicking and screaming through things and not trusting God in it. And we're weak, we're human, we're weak. God knows that. God knows that. If we could see how difficult it was, now, don't get me wrong, he was obedient to the very end, till hanging on the cross, but we saw how difficult that was and how anguish that was for Christ. Of course, he's taking on a much bigger thing than we're taking on. He's taking on the sin of the world. But to see him go through that and see him anguish through that should give us some comfort to know that even God can, that going through those situations, they're going to be tough. They're going to be hard. They're going to be emotional. They're going to be stressful. They're going to affect us. If it can, again, Christ is taking on the sin of the world. I mean, that's not taking on the bad news that you just lost your job. It's no comparison. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that relatively speaking, he's taking on, a big task that's stressing him, and we too go through those things. But he remembers that God is in control, and that he has a plan through that, and we have to trust God through that as well. As God we have to look at ourselves, are we being obedient to what God is calling us to? Are we being obedient through the situation and trusting Him through that situation? Because that's where the honor comes, is when we're obedient to it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close, and then we'll go through our prayer request. Father God, just thank you so much, Father, for opening our eyes to your word, Father. Father, to seeing how much Christ loved us, Father, how much you loved us, Father, to go through so much human anguish and pain, Father, for us, Lord, so we have the opportunity, Father, to know you, Father, to be with you forever, Lord. We just thank you, Father. That's a blessing, Lord. We just cannot repay. Lord, we thank you for that. Lord, we just ask you to open our eyes and ears to the message this morning, Father. As Brother Johnny brings it. Then back we go this week, Father, watching for opportunities, Father, to follow you in your will, Father. In Christ's name we pray. Thank you.
Yeah.